Hi, I'm Beth, creator of dryitcanit.com. I like to share with you tips and tricks for how-tos, canning, pressure canning, and dehydrating food, as well as recipes that I put together. Today, I'm going to make a French toast. I'm going to pressure can it, and it's really a two-step process. Now, this is not an approved recipe. In other words, it hasn't been professionally tested by a USDA, and because I'm going to use eggs in it, some people will consider it unsafe because the USDA says pressure canned dairy is just not a safe practice. I don't believe it's necessarily unsafe. I think it's just untested. So I'm going to go through this recipe. I'm going to show you what I do. I'm going to take you step by step, and then you'll have to decide for yourself if this is something you want to do for your family. So with that said, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a home economist. I'm just somebody who likes to go through, make recipes, and then use as much safe practice as I can for pressure canning. So what I'm starting with is some leftover French bread. And I sliced my French bread probably about 3/4 to an inch, or 3/4 of an inch to an inch thick. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cube these pieces. Now you can use sourdough bread if you want. You can use really any kind of bread you want. What I don't think you want to do really is a loaf of bread, like a sandwich loaf of bread that you might get in the store, where the crust and everything is pretty soft. And I say that because you want some bread with some structure in it. Otherwise, when we put everything together, it's going to pretty much fall apart. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut these cubes as evenly as I can. And I'm going to cut them into bite size. That one's probably a little bit big, but like so, probably about 1-inch cubes. I'm going to go ahead and cut all the rest of these up. And I'm going to put them on a plate, and then I am going to just set them in my oven, unheated oven, and I'm going to let them dry overnight. By letting them dry, they're going to absorb the flavoring and the eggs and the ingredients that I'm going to put in these tomorrow morning. So stay tuned, and I will take you step by step after I cube my bread and let it dry overnight. I have my breadcrumbs that I cut up last night, and I put them in the oven. You can leave them on the counter, really just to give them a little bit of dryness. So basically day-old bread. So they're still soft. They're not hard like you might get, dressing cubes if you buy them. But anyway, this is about 5 cups of bread cubes. So I'll put those in there like so, and then I'm going to set those aside for the minute. So the next thing I'm going to do is I want to preface this by saying sometimes I adjust my liquid amounts based on the type of bread I have and how well it absorbs that. So as I go through and give you the amount of ingredients, recognize that I might change that up a little bit once I mix it up, and you might need to do the same. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have eggs, milk, and butter. And again, I know eggs and dairy are not an approved item. Again, I think that this is fine. I've done this. Doesn't make it fine for you. I'm just showing you what I do. So what I have is about 1/4 cup of melted butter here. And as a general guideline, I like to use about 1 tablespoon per jar. I'm going to be using these 12-ounce jars today to make this. I've done this before in the 16-ounce jars, and honestly, it seems to get too compacted. So I find that these 12-ounce jars work better, something a little bit shorter. If you don't have these jars, maybe do smaller portions in the smaller 8-ounce half-pint jars. But I'll put a link to these below the video if I find them online. So I'm going to start with a half a stick of butter, in this case 4 tablespoons, and I'm going to add that primarily so that you can see what I've got here. And then to that, I'm going to add 3/4 cup of milk. Now I'm using skim milk, and you can use whatever you want. The reason that I'm going to do this is I want to mix this up, and I want to make sure, since my butter is a little bit warm, I want that to cool down a little bit, but I don't want it to get hard, because when I add the eggs, I don't want those eggs to become scrambled eggs with the hot butter. So I'm going to add my milk. Again, 3/4 cup is what I'm starting with. And then I have an immersion blender, and I'm just going to mix that up, like so. All right. Then to that, I am going to add 2 eggs, and then I'm going to use my immersion blender to mix that up. Now, certainly you can mix this up by hand. I find the immersion blender works really well because it gets rid of all that white stuff that sometimes is hard to hand mix. and it's really quick and really simple. But if you don't have an immersion blender, by all means, just go ahead and use your, use your whisk or, fork or whatever you have. So again, just gonna mix this up quick. Now you certainly could use cream for this if you wanted to. I haven't tested that. If you're going to use cream, you have a higher fat content, so maybe you can go without the butter. Haven't tested that. So right now I have milk, I have eggs, and I have butter in here. And you can see that this is all mixed really well. And I have, let's see, that gives me about a cup and a half. I guess there's probably some foam in there. So to that, I'm going to add some homemade vanilla. I usually take like a vodka or a bourbon. I prefer vodka. Put some vanilla beans in there, and then I make my vanilla. You can't beat that. So I'm going to add half a teaspoon. If I can get the right spoonful here. Half a teaspoon. So I'm going to use my dry ingredient first. I'm going to use half a teaspoon of cinnamon. Now if you prefer nutmeg or you don't want to have cinnamon, that's fine. I've made this actually with ground orange powder. That's also very good too with just the cinnamon. So half a teaspoon of cinnamon. And then I'm going to use a quarter teaspoon of salt. I like to do my dry ingredients first. And I'm just going to use half of the teaspoon there. Salt seems like it just brings out the flavor of everything. I'm going to add a half a teaspoon of vanilla. Again, if you don't have vanilla, don't want to use vanilla, that's fine. I just happen to really like vanilla and use it in a lot of my baking and my cooking. And then a quarter cup of brown sugar. If you don't have brown sugar, use regular sugar, that's fine too. Having a sweetener helps with preserving. Botulism really is difficult to grow. It won't grow actually in a sugar environment. That's not to say that this makes this a complete sugar environment. So again, I'm going to mix this up using my immersion blender. So mixing up all those ingredients just takes a second. This gets the cinnamon mixed in also without the clumps. And like so, we're done. And then I'm going to go ahead and add this liquid to my bread. And again, I have about 5 cups of a French bread here. And I'm just sort of going to pour that all over. And it's okay if you have some extra liquid here. Now, when you make this French toast, these eggs are going to coagulate. And you're going to have, your French toast might be a little bit tighter than if you bake it on the stove. So you can sort of see how the liquid is pooling on the bottom. And I'm just going to give this a really good stir to coat all of the pieces of bread here. I'm going to let this sit then for maybe 2 or 3 minutes just to sort of soak up that liquid a little bit. And then I'm going to give it another stir. So I'm going to be back in about 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and get this on the jars. It's been about 4 minutes. I've been stirring this about every minute. And you might be able to see I have just a little bit of liquid left at the bottom. So that's a good amount to have. When you add your liquid, you're going to want to make sure that you have enough liquid so that the bread can really soak it up. If you add your liquid and the bread soaks it up instantly, you're going to need to add more liquid. So again, I just let this sit for 4 minutes. So stir it every minute and your bread will be wet, but it's not going to be overly soaked. So I take my 12-ounce jars, and then I just begin to fill them. I'm going to use a spoon because it's a little bit easier. You don't want to pack this down. You just want to let it go in, and you want to fill it about 3/4 full because oftentimes this expands a little bit. I'm actually going to put just a tiny bit more in there, just a couple more pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and fill these jars, and then we'll talk about how I pressure can it. All right, I have my jars filled, and I filled them basically to a little bit below that lip. Now sometimes I find that these expand a little bit, sometimes I think they shrink. But you want to take a knife then and then just even out the cubes so that they're pretty evenly distributed. You don't want to pack them. So for example, in this one you can see I just need to kind of move it over a little bit so that they're not mounded. But again, make sure that you don't pack these. You want to keep it loose because they are going to kind of pull together and coagulate somewhat when you start cooking them. Now in this last one, I think it's this one, I actually have my data logger, which I laid sideways just so that it's laying within the bread so that I get a good read as opposed to the top where it's maybe going to give me a false read. So I'm going to take each of these jars and I'm going to wipe them off with water. I don't use vinegar on these simply because I have milk and eggs in here, but I want to make sure that I have, you know, everything clean, since I do have sugar in here and since I do have milk and eggs and butter, of course, which is also grease. Then I'm simply going to take each of my lids and put those on, and then I'm going to put these on just finger tight, and I'm going to put them in my canner. Now, I'm starting with cold water, cold food, and cold jars. I'm using an electric canner. My canner says typically to heat my jars first. I'm going to go ahead and go through that cycle, but I'm going to go through that cycle with my food in the canner. And if you have a pressure canner with a weight, I would suggest you do the same thing. The reason for that is I'm working with egg, and I don't want that egg to come up too fast because I don't want scrambled egg in my French toast. So I'm going to go ahead and put the rest of the lids and screw bands on my jars. I'm going to mark the one that has my data logger on it, and then I'm going to pressure can this for 30 minutes. I'm going to take those out. I'm going to let it cool. I'm going to pull the data logger and see what the data says, and then I'll be back to share with you what this all looks like. So, relatively simple, relatively quick, nice easy breakfast, but please stay tuned to watch the rest so that you understand the data as well. My French toast is all canned. It sat overnight. It looks nice, definitely a nice brown color. And I'm going to go ahead and open the one now with the data logger. And then I'm going to download the data and share that with you. So let's see what this looks like. So you can see what the inside looks like. Looks like French toast, right? Now, typically this is going to be a little bit more dense, simply because you have the pressure of the canner, and then you have the egg, which of course coagulates. So I need to get this out with the data. So here is the data logger, which I'll go ahead and wash off and then download. Now the French toast kind of comes out a little bit like pieces, and that's not unusual. And typically before I eat it, I'll just go ahead and break it up. But I can smell the cinnamon in it. It smells really good. And if I taste a piece of it, let's see what it is. So it is moist. It's not gummy by any means, but it's moist as if it soaked up all that egg. So I'm going to go ahead, heat this up in the microwave, add a little butter maybe and some syrup, and I'm going to have this for breakfast. Now, let me download the data and show you what that looks like, and then I'll be right back. Let's look at the data for the French toast in the 12-ounce jars. Again, here's the temperature, here's the time. At 12:45, the canner actually stopped its heating process and started the cooling process. And the temperature did climb a little bit, but it only got to 235, almost 236. That is not the 240 degrees to eliminate botulism. So let's talk about this for a minute. Stay with me for one more minute. So the temperature on the French toast did not get to the 240 degrees, which is necessary to destroy the botulism toxin. That said, it is high enough to destroy molds and yeasts and bacteria. So I feel actually pretty comfortable storing this long term. Now, given that these were 12-ounce jars, I've done the traditional taller 12-ounce jars, and the product ends up turning too dense in my opinion. So I do think you need to use the shorter jars. If you want to get to that 240 degree mark, and that's what you need to feel comfortable, I would do this 10 more minutes, and I'm going to note that in the recipe directions. I think the other thing you can do is use a shorter 8-ounce container, and again, just fill it loosely to this bottom, and then I think you can pressure can that for the same time, and I'm pretty comfortable that's going to get to the 240 degree mark. But this French toast is really good. I mean, it's definitely bready. It's definitely not dense like raw dough by any means. It's not hard. It's really pretty tasty. So I actually am going to enjoy mine with a little bit of syrup on it. I'm going to enjoy breakfast. I hope you enjoyed this video, or at least learned something from it. If you did, I'd love a thumbs up. That would really help me out in terms of knowing what you like. Also, if you can subscribe to the video in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll get notified when my other videos come up. So, thanks for watching. Happy canning.